You are listening to the new man beyond the Macho Jerk and the New Age Wimp. Your host is men's coach Tripp Lanier.
Is sex a source of frustration with your partner? Do you feel sexually rejected by them? And if you don't push for sex, will your partner ever initiate it? Many folks, too many folks, are unsatisfied with their sex lives. And this could be a huge source of frustration and resentment between partners, which can ultimately lead to affairs or divorce. But does it have to be this way? Ruth Ramsay is a sex educator, coach, and creator of a TED Talk that has garnered millions of views. She's seen inside the sex lives of many people, and today she's going to help us understand why sex is so challenging, as well as what we can do to make it less frustrating and more fulfilling. So Allison and I have done lots of podcasts together, just the two of us. And we haven't
professionally necessarily. I feel like we goof off.
We haven't done anything where we've interviewed someone. So you might watch our marriage dissolve today as we try to navigate this. So, well, I just want to set a little context here because I hear about this a lot. I work primarily with men, and I don't think this is necessarily something that is just about men. I think it happens on both sides. But for a lot of men who are still wanting sex, they are in committed relationships and want sex with their partner, and they propose sex to their partner or make a bid for sex from their partner, and they get shut down. And essentially a divide starts to happen where he can start to feel like his sex life is being held hostage by his partner. Like she's not interested in having sex. And I'll just say he, she, just for the simplicity of this. But it's like they don't want to have sex, but he does. And then there's also like it's not okay for him, or he's frowned upon, or he, quote, gets in trouble, or it creates a problem if he looks to satisfy himself sexually with pornography, or even just his own masturbation on his own time. That might be a source of conflict for them, much less going outside of the relationship for sex. And so the feelings of resentment and rejection build up, and even maybe on her side, she's tired of feeling pressured, I should say, to like, gosh, he's always wanting sex, and he never gets off my back about this kind of stuff, and so it just creates this unfortunate split there, and they start to villainize one another over something that should be really fun, and it's really like, how do you get back onto that thing where we both desire one another when we've been villainizing each other about this particular thing? So ultimately, I've seen this lead to affairs. I've seen this destroy marriages. It's a big deal. And so, that's a bit of context for what I'd like to explore with you. And is that something that you see or that you hear of in the work that you do with people?
Yes. What you've just described there is something that I hear about a lot. You are right to have just made the point that we're saying he and she, but of course the situation can occur the other way round as well. That's certainly something that I hear about. But it's this kind of downward spiral where sex has become associated with tensions, with guilt, with negativity. And the longer that goes on, the further down that spiral that couple go, until something which should be a kind of joyful heart of the relationship has become what can actually end the relationship.
Yeah.
And so kind of give us a sense of what's happening here. If it's so common, why is this occurring, and why is it so common in relationships?
Well, what I will caveat my reply with is, of course, I'm talking to people who are having problems in their sexual relationship. So just to make clear, I'm a coach, not a therapist or counselor. So I'm working with people who do feel ready and able and want to take positive action steps forward. It's not that they have trauma in the past that they need to resolve first with therapy. Even so, I am, by the nature of my work, working with people who are not satisfied in their sex life. So just because I hear this story a lot doesn't mean that it's absolutely the norm in society. But even so, it is something which I think is more common sometimes than is talked about even. I think the reason why this is so common is because we are not educated around sex when we're young in the way that I believe we should be, and because we have a culture of not talking about sex. We think that we should only talk if things are going wrong, and that sex should be this wordless, spontaneous, passionate thing that happens naturally, in air quotes, for a couple who are in love and who find each other attractive. But that's not how sex works. So typically after the first 6 months, year, maybe 18 months, where our brain chemicals are going crazy with lust hormones, once that starts to wear off and we're no longer feeling this spontaneous passion for each other, because at that point we don't start talking, because at that point we're not empowered with the understanding that this is normal and we just need to approach sex a different way, that's when the disconnect starts. And as soon as we start thinking there's something wrong, as soon as any kind of worry and fear comes in around any topic in life, that's where the division can start, unless we're able to sit down and talk through those worries and fears. And obviously with a topic like sex, which it's taboo to talk about, very often couples don't talk at that stage. And then that downward spiral starts.
You said that, you work with people who are interested in doing something about their sex life. Like they both are willing and wanting to make a change. And one of the things that I bump up against it with people is that, and kind of always I've been learned that there's kind of what we call a higher desire partner and a lower desire partner. Doesn't mean that the lower desire partner doesn't ever want sex at all. It's just tends to be a bit out of balance. And I'm curious about something a client actually said to me. They said, if I don't speak up for wanting sex, my partner won't initiate it. And then if I initiate it, they feel pressured. And there's sort of this weird, they might want to do something about it even, but that place where you're talking about, where they need to start talking about sex, I'm curious how that, how would even a person get their partner to want to work with you in that conversation of like, I don't know, I just don't want it as much as you, or like, that kind of conversation. Is that part of just being able to talk about sex that you're saying? Like, we just need to be able to talk about it. Is that part of the conversation?
That is part of it, yes. But I'm not necessarily working with both parties in a couple.
Okay.
Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm working with one half of the couple with the knowledge of the other partner, but they don't want to be directly involved. Sometimes I'm working with one partner without the knowledge of the other partner, and that can still work. The most typical of those scenarios, if I don't have both members of the couple, is that one person is working with me, the other is choosing not to, but does know that the work is happening. Mm-hmm. They will start to see a change in their partner, or their partner will be coming to them saying, oh, I spoke with Ruth about this, and Ruth gave me this exercise and encouraged me to share it with you, and Ruth recommended this TED Talk or this podcast. And their own change in attitude becomes kind of infectious, and the other partner gets curious and then naturally wants to come on board. But where it is a case where one partner wants the other one to be engaged with the process, the best way to get that started is to, first of all, try to get more comfortable in talking about sex from the understanding of why it's so difficult. When we actually think through all of this and we think, for example, in whose benefit or in what organization or social structure's benefit is it for us to not be able to talk about this? We're not gaining from this. This is threatening our whole relationship potentially.
Totally.
Who's benefiting from this? Who taught us that it was so wrong to talk about it? the sources of that information, were they right about everything? As adults now, would we trust and live by other things that those sources taught us? Typically, the answer to that is, well, no. And if we can get curious together around why it's so difficult, that can be a good starting point.
Yeah.
Then another tip from me that I've seen work so well for couples where this is the case is to have a look at an outside source of material and talk about that thing. Now, my specific example here is my TEDx talk. I've got a 6.5-minute talk called Revamp Your Sex Life in 6 minutes. I've had DMs, I've had emails, I've had messages from people all around the world who've said, we've never, ever talked about sex. And then your talk popped up either in my feed or in my partner's feed. They watched it and then said, hey, will you watch this talk with me? It's only 6.5 minutes. And then we talked about your talk. And then that opened the door to talking about sex more widely.
I love it.
So talk about somebody else talking about sex.
Yes, I love
as
that.
the starting point.
I want to
love
underline
that.
something here, which is that recognizing that, this is difficult to talk about, instead of just assuming this is the norm, but to just step back and recognize talking about XYZ, talking about sex in particular. We might not have a problem talking about what needs to be redone in the kitchen or who's going to take the kids to school on Tuesday, but having a conversation about sex and recognizing that that's so difficult and so loaded, just to be able to zoom out and say, why is this so difficult, instead of accepting it as the norm, and then to begin to massage that by just being open to listening to others talk about it, yourself and others that are in this space to talk about, can start to relax that. And then maybe there is something in there that is difficult to reveal. Maybe there isn't something working between them. Maybe something's uncomfortable physically, or there's something emotionally that needs to be repaired. But I can imagine opening that door could be very scary. What are some of the things that you see, why they're keeping that door closed? I hear that there's like a societal, cultural thing that says, let's not talk about sex. But what are some of the reasons why somebody would want to avoid that conversation?
Guilt, shame, and fear that there is something fundamentally broken or wrong with themselves. So it's fears of, I will never be able to perform in the way I want to, or the way I feel I should.
Or the way my partner wants me to.
There's something wrong with my body. There's something wrong with me sexually that I believe cannot be fixed. And if we talk about this, that thing will be revealed and it will all be over.
I want to underline, because that's not really about we can't talk about sex. Is that if we talk about sex, this other thing might come to light, and that's really scary.
I think it's a combination of those two things.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's all exacerbated by the lack of education.
Yeah.
People are struggling with things. They're feeling deep shame about aspects of them, of their sexual selves, or of how their body performs, or of what their fantasies are, that are entirely normal, but they don't realize that they're normal. If we had more awareness of the vast and beautiful spectrum of what's normal in terms of how our bodies perform, what our deepest desires are, what we want and need, then we wouldn't feel this shame that keeps us silent.
Okay. I think this is important, because if I'm starting to feel resentment towards my partner, and on the outside it looks like what they're giving me is stop asking me, stop coming at me with this. Is it possible for me to recognize there's something in there that's really difficult for them, and that they're avoiding this? And maybe I can have some compassion and curiosity instead of turning them into the villain.
Well, I think that's pretty high level, Tripp. How would you, I think maybe more the question is, how do you work with somebody that is having that attitude? And how in order to help them find compassion or see the other person's side of, there might be something else going on underneath this.
Yeah, I was just throwing it out there, like, if she's acting this way, or my partner's acting this way, maybe there's something that they're afraid of, instead of they just don't like sex, or they don't like me, like taking it personally. that maybe there's something else going on that makes it very difficult for them to get into this conversation and bring curiosity instead of screw this person, close ourselves off to them.
I think if we can have an awareness that our partner may be struggling in that kind of way, then that does massively help. Something that I'm always very careful of, though, if I'm working with a client and I'm helping them develop that awareness, that it's not all about you. It might not be that your partner is not at all interested in sex with you. This isn't a personal rejection of you necessarily. There are so many other things that could be going on for your partner. What I then don't want is that client to come out of the session and go, oh, so it's all about, to their partner, it's all about you. Let's explore what your problems are around this. No. But I'm thinking, as we're talking, about a client who I worked with who had only suggested once to their partner that they reach out for help, and their partner had made it an absolutely clear no way and shut that down. But even so, they'd reached out to me for some help, and I was just illuminating for them some of the things that their partner might be dealing with from my experience of dealing with clients. And most of it was total news to this client of mine. They happened to be a man, their partner was a woman, and even basic aspects of arousal science, basic aspects of female anatomy, things like the concept of the dual control model of arousal, which is more commonly talked about in terms of brakes and accelerators. We have our turn-ons, but we also have our turn-offs. And to help him develop an understanding of all of the things in their shared lifestyle, in their home, in their caring duties, all of the things that were turning off her offs.
Yes.
He had no clue about any of this. So he started changing certain behaviors, and I will say it, becoming more helpful around the house, made a big difference. His understanding of her anatomy, how arousal works, all of that allowed him to gradually change his behaviors towards her to create an environment in which it was easier for her to feel relaxed and feel arousal. And when that happened, she was then more likely to accept his initiations. And then it got to a point where she was initiating. And her rejection, as he perceived it, her rejection of him sexually wasn't about rejecting him sexually. It was about this whole other picture. And so often I see that's the case.
Yes.
Something that I want to share, because I do see it very often. So typically this is when I'm working with one half of a heterosexual couple and I'm working with the woman. And she's telling me that she doesn't want sex. The type of sex that they have when they do have it isn't particularly satisfying for her. And I might say something like, okay, imagine if you could have a Sunday afternoon set aside with no childcare duties. Basically, let's remove all your sources of usual stress. And you've got 3 hours, and let's imagine that your husband is up for doing anything that you want to do. You're going to design those 3 hours. What would you include? And she'll begin thinking, and then she'll start saying, well, this and that. And, oh, well, he'd never do such and such. He'd never give me a back massage for half an hour. And I'm like, well, let's pretend he would. And eventually she'll have described this whole experience. And I'll say, okay, would you like that? Oh, yes, definitely. So it's not that she doesn't want sex, it's that she doesn't want the kind of sex they have been having. And so then it's about her communicating to her partner in a way that doesn't make him feel threatened or judged. We need to be doing it in a different kind of way. And then I will be absolutely up for it.
Yeah.
And I love what you're speaking to. You spoke to so much of what I wanted you to speak to in this interview. It makes me so happy. So, and also just this beautiful place where suddenly there's not a problem anymore. It's not about something's wrong. It's about what's possible and how can we make this more right? Right? Like
Yes.
we moving
Yeah.
away from problematic, something's wrong. There's sort of just the natural breaks that happen in the stress of thinking there's a problem versus, oh my gosh, we're just looking at this wrong. We have to turn it, we have to turn this completely upside down and look at our heads, look at it sideways and then see this little crack over here and then go in that direction and explore what's over there. And then it can become creative and fun. That's what it sounds like. And I'm curious if that's my instant reaction when I hear you speaking to this. I'm wondering if the people that you've worked with have had a similar enthusiasm or curiosity show up for them. Like they suddenly kind of come into like, oh my gosh, there's more freedom here. There's more space here. There's more possible here. Yeah?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
So when I'm on a discovery call with a couple, so a free initial call, what I'm ideally looking for is for them to be sitting close together or touching, for them to be talking to me on the Zoom screen, but also turning to look at each other. If a couple at either ends of a sofa and not even looking at each other, that's gone way beyond what I can help with. But as long as a couple both clearly have love and affection for each other and want to make it work, then the key message that I convey in that discovery call is you are normal in struggling with these things and it is nobody's fault. It's not your fault. It's culture and society's fault that has brought about this situation where you can't talk about this at all. Now, as soon as a couple kind of realize that, you see their expression change, the guilt has been lifted. And I'll say what you are kind of abnormal in is having the bravery to take these steps. It's clear to me that you want this to work because you're here on this call. So that's a fantastic first step. And you see, as I say, their facial expression, their body language change. Oh, good. It's not about working out whose fault this was. It's not our fault. And suddenly they're then a team. Let's work together on this. And very, very quickly, typically they get to the point where you're describing, where they're excited, they're hopeful. I make very clear that this will be a journey of discovery about yourselves as individuals, as well as about yourselves as a couple. And you are supporting each other in this journey of discovery as well. And you get to witness the person you love learning all these incredible things about themselves and then sharing them with you. And again, that can take off some of the pressure on the relationship itself. We're learning about ourselves individually as well. And the downward spiral that I've mentioned very, very quickly becomes an upward spiral, develops momentum. And it's absolutely beautiful to watch that. There's so many resources out there now around sex as well, that in addition to coaching with me, there'll be anything from reading books, watching podcasts, to maybe going on a weekend away to the city and going to a strip club and going to a sex shop, or going away on holiday somewhere exotic and erotic. And this exploration of sex and pleasure becomes a bigger part of their lives overall.
You mentioned something that there was a couple that were struggling. She said, absolutely not. We're not going to get help. And he chose to go anyway. And I want to underline something here, which is I can imagine some guy feeling guilty. Like, well, she says, no, I don't want to violate her. I don't want to violate her trust. But the way you talk about it is he took a stand for their sex life. And how could somebody navigate that if the partner is absolutely not, we're not getting help and don't you go get help or something? That's the message, because I think that's really important, because like you said, his steps forward opened the door, and with some ease and time that helped them both. Yeah. What would you do to help that guy?
In the example I gave, I don't know if his partner had said, we're not getting help and I do not want you to go and get help.
Okay.
And I don't know to this day whether she ever found out that he was getting help. But for him, he had felt that it was all his fault. He had felt such guilt about it all that he was worried that it might eventually spell the end of a relationship. He had taken her rejection of the idea of getting help personally. Am I beyond help? And so he had come to me partly to try to sort himself out for his own sake, as well as to hopefully sort the relationship out. If somebody has said, I'm not up for going on a journey to get help around this, and I don't want you to either, knowing that coaching, or maybe if therapy was more appropriate, either of those is a fully confidential space. Legally, it's a confidential space. Then I would say there are much bigger issues in the relationship overall than simply issues around their sex life.
Yeah.
But however, looking at it more compassionately, is that the partner who's saying, I don't want you getting help either, is it because they feel such embarrassment and shame around the idea of their sex life being discussed, even in a confidential space with a professional? So I would be curious there. Why is this so difficult?
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I mean, that happens just with couples therapy, like somebody wanting to go do couples therapy. Often the partner's super threatened by the concept of like, I don't want to bring all of our personal stuff, especially our problems, to be witnessed by somebody else, you know?
Yeah, I think there's something there about taking responsibility. Well, there's some of this which is my responsibility, so I'm going to take responsibility for myself, and I want to learn. I want to get help. How can I be better? How can I be more informed? So I'm going to take responsibility for me instead of let me go talk to somebody and we can make this my wife's fault.
I'm thinking of a conversation that I had a couple years ago with a person who was not interested in sex, had their own trauma history with sex, and you know, I'm not trying to get into like trauma, all the therapeutic sort of things, but her husband, you know, still wanted to play sexually. And when she wasn't up for it, he would go watch porn. And just as a sweet side note, I was so touched by this. I found out in talking to her husband was that he would find porn. He would find the women that looked like her. So sweet. So anyway, but she was like, no, shut this down. I am not okay with you watching porn. I don't want you to, like, I'm really not okay with that. So in some ways it kind of piled on the brakes, the things that would have her pump the brakes. So I'm just curious about that. Like there's one aspect of like, I don't want you to go talk to somebody to get help or be exposed. And then there's the like, I don't want you watching porn either. I don't want you doing anything with your sexual energy. I don't want it, but I don't want you doing anything with it either. So I'm curious how is that kind of in the category of like, well, they got much bigger problems, or how could we look at this compassionately too?
This is that kind of stalemate situation that I have occasionally come to a point at which I feel that I have nothing left to offer. It is the only situation where my kind of toolkit has ended up empty, when it's that absolute stalemate. It's a challenge for me not to bring my own personal feelings into the space when this is happening. And there's, I think, a fundamental difference in beliefs there between the person saying, I don't want you even in sort of exploring and enjoying your own sexual energy as an individual, or with me either.
Yeah. I think it's because they take it personal. They take that personally too.
Yeah. The person who is the one who doesn't want to be sexual, I think until such a point as they are ready and able to understand more about why the other needs to be sexual, then it is a bit of a stalemate situation, and a very, very sad situation as well.
And just out of curiosity, what are your personal feelings? Like you said, you have a hard time like keeping your own opinions out. I'd love to hear them if you're willing to share.
So personally, I think, whilst keeping in mind some people are asexual, other people may have been shut down by trauma, past experiences to such a degree that they are not currently able to be sexual. But aside from that, I believe we're all sexual beings. And we are sexual beings in different senses of that term throughout our entire lives. I think that the ultimate sexual relationship we have is with ourselves through our lives. Our sexuality, our sexual energy is something that belongs to us and that we can experience as an incredibly positive, joyful, and nourishing life force. If or when we then choose to share that with others and to accept others' energy to us, then amazing. But fundamentally, it starts with us and ends with us. I think to try to tell somebody you shouldn't and you mustn't experience that. You must shut that down within yourself because that is shut down within me or doesn't exist within me. I personally, so not as a coach, me personally, I think that's very, very wrong.
Yeah.
I would try to have compassion for somebody who felt the need to do that. But my personal view would be that's totally, totally wrong.
Yeah.
It's selfish. It's harmful.
Yeah.
It's like saying to your
You're
partner,
asking somebody to cut off their life force energy.
Exactly. Now, of course, a population group where we see society try to do that very often is people with disabilities. Back when I was a striptease artist, which I did for over a decade, I became very involved with the cause of the erotic rights and recognition of people with disabilities. And that's a case where, as I say, large areas of society would say they, in air quotes, shouldn't have a sex education. They're not sexual beings. Sex is not for them. This person in a residential care home, disability care home, oh, he's masturbating. That's disgusting. Stop him doing it. You know, as I said, I think with those few exceptions, we're all sexual beings and we should be allowed to enjoy and inhabit and explore our own sexual energy within ourselves, whatever our age, whatever our physical state, and to try to stop anybody from doing that, I think is a cruel act.
Yeah. This is something I really value that you're speaking to as well, because you are talking about life force energy. I watched it in our daughter, and just coming online from being born and coming into the world to watching her kind of learn her body in terms of her abilities of walking and climbing and running and jumping and playing. And then watching her enthusiasm as she grows for certain sports or certain, creative acts or whatever. And watching her, wanting to play, even like tussle and wrestle with her father or a puppy or whatever, and how all of that, it's actually the same energy, and it's just like she hadn't come into her own hormones or anything yet. It hasn't iterated sexually yet, but it's still the same energy, and I find that what you spoke to around like we're in relationship with ourselves with this is ours from birth to death and maybe beyond, this is ours. I love that you spoke to that. So I just wanted to name, like, the piece around your personal opinion around how it's wrong. My word was abhorrible. Like, it's like, no, we don't do this. It's not just shutting down the sexual energy. You're shutting down life force energy. It's just, it's basically saying you don't get to exist here. You need to dim your light here. And that's what we're saying is no. We don't do that with each other. We treat each other. We want each other's light. In whatever expression and form they have to give. Yes?
Yes.
Amen.
Beautiful. I'm glad you guys spoke to that. All right, I want to come back to some of the coping mechanisms that some couples use. The scheduled sex. Like we have sex every Sunday at 2:00.
That was a client.
And I have some challenges with this because I don't think it addresses our deep desire to be wanted and to be desired and to feel desired. So I can imagine on some levels it's sometimes we just got to schedule sex because life is busy. But if the other partner's like, this is my duty, I just go have sex with my husband and let him get it done. Let him finish, and then he's off my back until next Sunday at 2. That pity sex, that kind of thing, like this is just another
Chore.
thing that I do. I go get groceries and I pick up the kids and then I let him screw me on Sunday. It's just like this thing I tolerate. It doesn't speak to the deeper desire to have our partner want us and desire us. So I wonder what your thoughts are around some of these coping mechanisms that maybe don't deal with what's really going on.
Well, when it comes to scheduling, what I encourage busy couples to do is not to schedule sex. Absolutely not. We cannot consent days ahead of time to intimate physical sexual acts at, as you said, for example, 2:00 on a Sunday. But what I do very, very much encourage couples to do is schedule private, intimate time together. And in that time, create the environment that's most likely to lead to them feeling desire. So what I mean by this, for example, is maybe you have 2 hours on a Thursday evening where you can have private time. And you know that if you put your phones on silent, you have a hot shower together, that you've made the effort when you got up that morning to leave the bedroom tidy. Maybe you have particular music, maybe even particular coloured lighting in the bedroom that you use for intimate time. That by the time you've done those things and the bedroom's warm and everything, and you're lying on the bed together, relaxed, having eye contact, maybe a bit of non-sexual massage, that from that point, and maybe you're only half an hour into your 2 hours, at that point, you'll start thinking, oh, actually, maybe I might be up for something a bit more sexually intimate. And it gradually goes from there. Now, the reason I think that scheduling that kind of time is so important is because simply otherwise it doesn't happen. We schedule work, fitness, wellness, family, social visits. It might even be as a couple, on a Monday, we say, right, when are we going to go to the supermarket and do the big shop this week? For example, we schedule so much, and yet we leave something as important as intimate, connected time with each other. We think it's just going to happen spontaneously. And somehow that if actual sexual play is part of that will arise spontaneously, and it won't. The best way to encourage that to happen is to give the time and space to create the environment which allows that to happen. Understanding what that environment is, that will be unique to each couple. And this is where understanding concepts such as brakes and accelerators comes in. What do I need in order to make it most likely that I'm going to naturally feel arousal? What do you, my partner, what do you need? What things can I do for you? If our time is in the diary this week is Thursday evening, and for example, on a Monday morning, my husband and I, we look at our diaries for the week, work, social, this and that, and we'll say, when are we putting a heart in the diary? And we'll find like 2 hours, ideally longer, but maybe 2 hours. And and we'll put the heart in the diary. And then that is protected time. That is set in stone. So that day, we're both thinking, what can we do for the other that will help make sure that come 7 p.m., we're likely to be feeling like having sexual intimate time. And so we're kind of planning the run up to it in order to help each other. Something else that's fantastic about putting this kind of time in the diary is that you can anticipate it, hopefully pleasurably. So something that's incredibly important is to make sure the sexual intimacy we're having is enjoyable. We are not going to crave something that doesn't feel worth the time and effort.
Yes.
I can see you nodding. A client will say, well, describe intimate sexual activity when it happens. They'll describe something that isn't very enjoyable at all for them, but that they have consented to. And then they'll say, but what's wrong with me? I don't have a libido. And I say, sex takes time and energy. Why would your brain make you crave something that isn't worth the time and energy? So when we can make sure our sexual interactions are enjoyable, then when we see, tomorrow evening and there's a heart in the diary, we look forward to it.
Yes.
That looking forward to it is the very start of building our arousal towards it. So it can get to the point where that scheduled time, instead of being something we dread, have to do this at 2:00 on Sunday afternoon. It's like, can't wait to get through the week so that it gets to 2:00 on a Sunday afternoon. Mm-hmm. So it's about creating this upward spiral.
Yes.
So often I get pushback from couples when I suggest scheduling, and I will describe it in the terms I've described it to you. And I'll say, please just try it for a month. And if it doesn't work, I'll never mention it again. And it works. Now, the last thing on this, where a couple or when one half of the couple says, oh, no, it should be spontaneous. I want spontaneous sex back in our relationship like it used to be. That's what I want. I'll say to them, the route to getting that is through having a good, ideally fantastic, pleasurable, scheduled time together. If after a few weeks, several weeks, you've got to the point where you're both looking forward to that time, maybe it's only Wednesday night, but you've spotted in your diary Sunday, the heart in the diary. Maybe you've been talking about sex and you've revealed something that you want to try and you've agreed Sunday's the day. And you look at that heart in the diary for Sunday and you get a little thrill, but it's only Wednesday, but suddenly you're thinking, actually, I'm feeling like sex now, and you initiate in the right way, you're having spontaneous sex. Mm-hmm. Scheduling can be the route back to spontaneous sex in your relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And you're speaking so much to you're speaking so much to navigating the whole gas and brakes piece. Mm. And you're, kind of something when I studied, I can't remember her name, but I studied a little bit with a woman that was teaching about BDSM. I was super curious about that. And one of the things that she said, and maybe you said it, I don't know, maybe I was learning from you, but I think that it was this other woman that said that she was saying you have to create a separate room or a separate, like you have to shed this clothing of, you're the wife, the mom, the nurse, the taxi driver, the, secretary, the coordinator, like you have to shed all of your other roles consciously and commit to, like, when you're going to do that kind of time, if you want to get into this sort of thing, you have to protect it with boundaried. You have to set boundaries on all of your other roles. You have to really let yourself go. Like you have to set all the other parts of you free. Or other roles free. Those roles don't get to enter that room. That room is very specific for a certain type of relationship or certain type of role you want to play. And I'm hearing you speak to that. You're saying no to so many other things so you can be a yes to what you want to be, more of what you want in your life. And I think about that. with my husband here. Like we're very active sexually, and it's like we don't do what you're suggesting to do, but I do it in my mind because I have to, like, I'll be like, just hang on. Like, it helps when we're like, no expectations. We might not have sex. Let's just lay down and to be skin on skin or whatever. But there's a place where I'm like, just hang on. And in my mind, this is a technique from EMDR. It's called containment, where you imagine a container outside of the room that you're in. And it could be anything. It could be a safe or a shipping container, or a Ziploc bag, whatever. It doesn't matter what works for you, or a basket. But you're putting everything that doesn't belong in what you're up to right now in that container. All your problems, all the things you've got to, all the laundry, all, chore, anything that you got for work going on that day. You just have to separate, get it out of the room, and then seal that container, and then come back to yourself and like, oh, I have more space now. What, just mentally and energetically, now I can feel more space. Now I can call more of my own life force and energy in for me instead of tending to all the other things. And to me, that's speaking to that gas and brakes. Like, because I feel my desire with him pretty much every day. I can feel my desire with him, but I also have things I got to get to, with work or whatever. So I like what you're speaking to in terms of ways to build and also ways to protect that. You're protecting your own relationship with your sexual energy or your life force energy or your desire energy, however you want to call it. Yeah?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I just want to leave room that you mentioned the taxi driver and the nurse and the secretary.
Yeah.
I kind of like those things.
Yeah,
so especially the taxi driver. We haven't tried that one yet. So if you're open to being the naughty Uber driver.
He was trying to have sex with me before our call this morning. I was like, man, I got no way. I got to get my head in the game. If I have an orgasm, I'm going to be just floating around all stupid. And he was like, no, you got to learn the secretary, like how the secretary can do her job and have sex. But we play like that a lot.
That was private, by the way.
Sorry, that's private. I forget we're on a podcast. Anyway, you can cut it out. But yeah,
I want to speak to this. Is something that we don't learn until it seems like it's pretty later on in our sexual lives. I mean, I look back on what an idiot I was sexually for the first. I'm 52 now, so the first 50 years of my life. And still working on it. But is there anything that, I mean, how do we introduce this into the culture earlier on where we have more of an appreciation for this instead of just what we might see in pornography or what we don't talk about? So there's this vacuum of, like not knowing how to approach sex and not knowing how to talk about it.
Well, first of all, you mentioned pornography there. And the majority of the portrayals of sex that are shown in mainstream pornography can be very damaging. But I also want to acknowledge that what we see in mainstream film and TV is also only a very narrow, limited, and often incorrect view of how sex works. So even people who've never seen any pornography are still, I believe, picking up very, very harmful messages from mainstream film and TV. So how do we re-educate around that? There's a growing body of amazing sex education for adults out there. Here in the UK on Netflix, we have a 3-part series called The Principles of Pleasure. I'm not sure if it might be a US series originally, but on the big streaming platforms, we're seeing good sex education material coming out there and getting ever increasing viewing figures. And I think the more of that that's available, the better, because it starts conversations. So like my TEDx talk, a couple can watch a talk or watch a docuseries and then talk about that thing. There was Gwyneth Paltrow's series, Love, Sex, Goop, which even if you are very against her whole Goop brand and concept, that series has a lot of fantastic content within it. And couples will work with me who've said that it was that series that got them talking about sex, that got them realizing that it wasn't their fault that they were having the struggles they were having, and gave them the language to actually discuss what was going on.
That's great.
At the moment, I think it's still a bit taboo to be open about accessing that kind of content. So one half of a couple might see it on Netflix and think, oh, I'd like to watch that, but I daren't suggest it to my partner. But the more of that kind of content comes out and the more mainstream it becomes, I think the more acceptable it will become to watch it. And I think that will hugely help. What I would then hope would happen is that a generation of parents of kids and teens now will feel more able to talk to their kids about sex education, pleasure, consent, all of those kinds of things. And hopefully that will allow us to break the pattern that's gone on generation after generation of not talking about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Yeah. You have done such a beautiful job in this interview talking about how couples can begin the conversation. And one of the, we didn't know what you were going to say in this. And my thought was like, oh, just listen to this. Just listen to this conversation together. Let's see where you go from here. Like this can be the seed for all the other things. Just invite your partner to listen to this. You do courses for people and programs. Can you speak a little bit to ways that people that might be interested in getting some support can find you or find what you have out there?
I'll just explain how the workshops and the workbooks and everything came about. When I started out as a sex coach, I had imagined that I would be working one-to-one and with couples. But what I discovered very quickly was people were very shy to talk about sex. Also that people didn't have basic understandings of anatomy, of arousal science and that kind of thing. And also weren't necessarily prepared or couldn't afford to financially invest in one-to-one support. Spending money on improving your sex life in this way is still very unfamiliar. So I thought, okay, people are curious. They want to work on this, but they're shy to talk to me, or they don't want to commit the money to talk to me. And also they don't know the basics. So I realized that a kind of educational concept was needed. To create change, though, we need to go a step beyond that. We need to learn about something and then have the time and support to think, how does this uniquely apply to me? Coaching style. Yeah. So I came up with my course, the Passionate program, which is what I call guided self-coaching. So I teach concepts. I always make sure to reference where those concepts came from and always using, peer-reviewed medical sources. So I'll teach a concept and then I'll say, and now in page 8, for example, on your workbooks, there are 3 questions to help you explore what does this mean to you? And then how will you put that learning into practice in your own unique life? So somebody who wasn't ready or able to have one-to-one coaching, the course and the workshops I offer, they go beyond just simply let me teach you about this thing. They provide the questions and the framework to say, now, does this apply to you? And then the step beyond that, what action steps will you take to put this into effect in your own life? So that's the kind of teaching, educating and coaching framework that I devised for the Passionate program, for my workshops. And I've seen people have such incredible success with it. For a couple to watch and learn together and then to answer the same questions separately, and then to be able to compare their answers. It's so much easier to do that than just to sit opposite each other at your kitchen table or in a cafe table and go, okay, so, well, we're not both happy sexually. Yeah. Where do we even start with this? Yeah. There's 5 magic words, a very short sentence that I advise couples use, that I use every time in my own sex life with my husband. And those 5 words are, what do you need tonight? Or it could be, what do you need this afternoon, for example. It recognizes that we can have sex and want to have sex for lots and lots of different reasons. It may be we have been feeling emotionally vulnerable. Maybe we're a bit upset about something in the rest of our lives and we want to feel protected and held and loved. Maybe we've had some kind of triumph or success and we want to feel wild and powerful. Maybe we want to totally step outside of our usual identities for some reason. We want to explore a kinky side of ourselves or whatever it might be. And checking in, what do you need tonight, recognizes that. Typically, couples will say to me who are not having fully satisfying sex lives, they'll say, from the moment that it's clear we're on a path that's going to lead to sex, we fall into a pattern of doing exactly the same thing. And someone might say to me, I can predict within a 10-second window when my partner's going to stop kissing me and move their mouth down to my nipple. And then I can predict within a 10-second window when they're going to start going down on me or whatever. And it might be that this series of moves, this pattern, leads to intercourse that leads to both parties having an orgasm. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's satisfying, that it's varied, that it's playful, that it's exciting, and it can get very boring. Checking in, what do you need tonight? First of all, it makes us check in with ourselves. What do I actually want right now? What kind of sexual play do I need? Do I desire? What's going to make me feel good? And then you share that with each other. And it might be that you find that you just want a cuddle. You both wanted a cuddle and you would have just gone through the motions of having actual sexual intercourse with each other that neither of you deeply wanted. But it makes sex more varied because each time might be different. It makes each partner feel more understood and more seen and more considered. And it results in sex that's more satisfying and more pleasurable. And when we're having varied, satisfying, pleasurable sex, we want more of it. And so our sex life becomes more frequent and more pleasurable overall. So just those 5 words, what do you need tonight? I encourage everyone to use every time they have sex.
Beautiful. Ruth Ramsay, thank you so much. Great to see you. Great to have you talk with us today. It was very helpful.
To find out more about me and my work, you can go to my website, which is ruthramsay.com. I'm on Instagram for now as a sex educator on Instagram. That could change at any moment. But for now, I'm on Instagram at ruthramsay_. And I'm on Substack at ruthramsay.substack.com. On there, I do it's not really a newsletter. It's my weekly reflections on the world of sex. It's called Something for the Weekend, and it comes out on a Saturday morning. And I always intend to include something in there that you can put into action in your sex life that weekend.
Nice. That's
Beautiful.
Great. Thank you so much. It's so good to talk to you about all this.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If these interviews are helping you, please leave a positive review on whatever podcast app you use so that others can discover the show more easily.